what are the demands of the game? That's the most important thing. What are the demands for that person? We know a wicket keeper, a fast bowler, a spinner, a batsman will have a different energy cost during that performance. So once you understand that and understand that better, you can start look at that individual and think, right, what does your nutrition need to be on a given day to support that performance? So your hydration strategy would be largely dependent on, well, the individual, but also on the climate. So with more intent, when you have a meal, look at it and think to yourself, is that good nutrition quality? Have I got some protein there? Is there some carbohydrate? Am I getting some vegetables or antioxidants? If you're doing that more often than not, you're giving your body the best chance to grow and develop, and then who knows where that might take you.
Cricket Life Stories with me, Neil Kagram. Today we're joined by Chris Rosimus. Chris, how's it going?
Really good, thanks, Neil. Thanks a lot for inviting me onto your channel. It's great, mate. It's great to be invited on.
Chris, you're going to give us a nutritional talk, some tips for young cricketers, experienced cricketers of all levels. Before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about your career to date, your experiences in the field of nutrition, and your work in the field. 6 years with ECB as well. Run us through it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Neil. So, yes, my background, I got into nutrition probably 11 years ago now. I had a very different background, really. I was an alarm engineer for 6 years, and I got into football coaching, and through football coaching, I did my coaching badges, and there's elements of nutrition in the badges that really sparked an interest in sports nutrition for me. So I decided to change that career, move into nutrition, went through all the process of education. And to cut a long story short, I was very lucky enough and fortunate enough to get the role with the England cricket team in 2011. So I was with the ECB for 6 years, which was just an unbelievable experience and a great period of my career and a great platform to build my performance nutrition career. And during that time, I was working for the English Institute of Sport, who would kind of second me out to the England cricket team. So I was with the England cricket team via them. During that time, I would also have various consultancy roles in football, various Premier League and Championship football clubs. I worked in professional cycling for a couple of years as well. I've lectured at universities. Spent 3 years with Leicester City Football Club during the time when they were successful in the Premier League, which was, as a football fan, was an unbelievable experience. And now that's led me to the previous 5 years, and I'm leading the nutrition department at the Football Association.
Run us through your time at the ECB specifically. You're obviously involved in the 13-14 Ashes, which has got a lot of attention. Talk us through from a nutritional perspective, were your ideas receptive, and your general takeaways from that 6 year period?
Yeah, I'm smiling. I look back on that period with great fondness, but it was incredibly challenging. I could sit here and tell you how great it was, I guess, and the impact that I had in areas. And I look back on the 6 years, and I was very proud of what I achieved. But in the early days, it was very challenging. It was a very challenging role because 2010-11 performance nutrition isn't what it is. It's not what it is now. It wasn't what it is now, really. It was relatively new. At cricket, there was nutrition was just becoming established, and I was brought in. So the biggest challenge I had in the early days was really trying to promote performance nutrition as an acceptable part of the sports science culture within the team. And it was the players were brilliant, I've got to say, but they were probably quite sceptical at first, wondering how this would help their performance. So the first couple of years, I would say it was more around really establishing trust in me as a practitioner, but also showing them the benefit that performance nutrition can have. Because I remember some of the common kind of responses I would get through nutrition would be, okay, well, that's all well and good, but how will it help my cover drive? That's a really hard question to answer to an established England cricketer. But over time, we started to help players around key areas such as body composition, looking at fast bowlers, looking at what is performance for a fast bowler, how do we keep a fast bowler on the park for 5 days in a test match, for example. So you start looking to optimize body composition to reduce the risk of injury, and then players start really buying into that. And then you start looking at the food that we put out for the players as well. We look at elements around how can we keep players fresh from injury, keep their immune system strong. When the amount of travel the England cricket team would do in a calendar year, if back then, even now, that's a significant toll on the body, along with performance. So how can we, through good nutrition, how can you support the immune system? And ultimately, you're trying to help their performance on recovery. For ultimately, what nutrition is in any sport, cricket, football, whatever it is, it's putting in good support so they can fuel appropriately for whatever format of the game it will be, and they can recover appropriately so they can go again and do it again the next day. You mentioned around the 2013 Ashes series. That was, it was wasn't a successful Ashes series for the team because obviously we lost 5-0 out there. But for me personally, that was where we did a lot of work. We really, I think that nutrition-wise, we made a real shift in the culture of nutrition at that point, because what we decided to really focus on getting the foundations of nutrition right, and that was the food that we would serve in my early stages. I would audit all 18 county cricket clubs in England, even look on our own nutrition services. And what we found was that the food provision wasn't that great. So rather than trying to put a plaster on things through supplementation and that kind of stuff, we had a strong strategy where I was embedded in all the counties, and we worked with their sports science team and their chefs to improve their nutrition provision. We developed a really strong recipe book to really give chefs the tools to provide great food for cricket, and that was based on different formats of the game. And that was something that we released, and unfortunately got leaked during the 2013, just before the 2013 Ashes, which still gets mentioned now every year, like 6 years later. And it got a lot of fun got poked at that actually from the Australian press, but I still look back on that with immense pride, because it was a symbol of how we'd shifted from literally, your scones and your poor nutrition to performance nutrition, or closer to what performance nutrition looks like for cricket performance. So that was a big thing that we did. But I think ultimately we, in that 6 years, we just moved the dial towards understanding that performance nutrition can have an impact on performance, rather than just it's about healthy eating and weight loss. The attitude towards nutrition changed in that time, and that's probably what I'm probably most proud of, to look back on that 6 years.
Do you think that at the modern day, currently, there is enough importance still placed on the topic of nutrition in cricket specifically?
It's hard to say. I mean, I've been out of cricket now for 4.5 years, so I can only talk about what I left. What I do know, the ECB and England Cricket employ a nutritionist who I know really well, who's a fantastic practitioner. So the nutrition provision service there hasn't stood still. That's progressed. So I'm in no doubt that that's in a strong place. But when I did leave county cricket, there was a huge gap in county cricket. There was probably, of all 18 counties, maybe 1 or 2 that had a part-time nutritionist at best. So that's why I used to go into all the counties and give them 4 days of my time to try and give them some structure and some support. So I don't know where that is now, but at the time when I left, the provision wasn't great, and even lower than that, the academies and probably down into the grassroots cricket. It wouldn't surprise me if there was still a lack of knowledge and education around nutrition, and I firmly believe that it is overlooked. Well, not just in cricket, I would say in all sports, it can get overlooked. And I think it's such an important component of life performance and performance, from a sporting point of view, that it potentially sometimes doesn't get the attention that it actually needs.
Do you think that in terms of a nutritional plan, it needs to be quite bespoke when it comes to an individual cricketer? Say you were to go into a team now, would you look at it as a team thing or as an individual bespoke nutritional plan?
It's a great question. There's 2 elements to that. There are elements of team processes that are there for the team. So the food provision is there for the team, and generally sporting teams eat a buffet style meal. So that provision has to be for the team. Some of the processes that you would put in place around immunity, for example, would have a team process. But ultimately, within that, how the individual would select nutrition from to boost their immunity, for example, or from that buffet style, it has to be individualized. And the one thing I reflect on my time at the ECB is that if I was I'm 4 years more experienced now, I'm a better practitioner than I left. Now I would focus more on the individual component of the nutrition rather than relying an over reliance on the individual to make the right choices, because it's hard to apply really correct nutrition that matches your performance. Takes a lot of work from the nutritionist to practitioner to dedicate time to think, right, what are the demands of the game? That's the most important thing. What are the demands for that person? We know a wicket keeper, a fast bowler, a spinner, a batsman will have a different energy cost during that performance. So once you understand that better, you can start look at that individual and think, right, what does your nutrition need to be on a given day to support that performance and therefore recover from that performance? And then what does it look like in training? What does the training schedule look like? So every meal should not really be equal, in my view. It should be tailored to the individual demands. That's really easy to say in theory. It's really hard to apply in practice. And that's one of the areas that I have really tried to dial up in my practice over the last 4 years, because it's hard, but it's worth the effort, because it's ultimately that will have the impact on performance rather than the generic support. And then you've got to be pragmatic with it. So when you look at, if your support is very limited, for example, I was a one-man band at the ECB, you can't give a high level of individual support to every player. There's just not enough time in the day. So you have to be really strategic with how you go about that and how you prioritize that. But what's really important, I believe in, is that there are support levels for everybody. And how much you can give that ultimately depends on how much resource that you've got. But to answer your question, if you want to truly impact performance, you have to work with the individual. And that comes with a really good kind of coaching relationship, I guess, between that practitioner and player.
The young cricketer is perhaps watching this and is not that well versed on the subject of nutrition. You know, if they were going into a season, the summer's coming up in the UK, from a holistic perspective, what should they be looking to get out of their food intake? Is it more energy, better recovery, muscle gain, or all of the above?
Well, it's all of the above to some level. I think that the young cricketers coming in, that the nutrition aimed at young players versus senior players and mid-20s players, for example, is very, very different, because there are different levels of maturity, different levels of understanding, different levels of, I guess, bias from being conditioned from external influences. So it's incredibly different for different who you're working with. But I think if you're talking about holistic general advice for young players, but before I start thinking about, I guess, what do I need for muscle growth, it's actually, is your foundation of nutrition pretty solid? That's where I would look at with any young player. And what I mean by that is, are they eating 3 good meals a day, first and foremost? So have they got that foundation? Are they eating anywhere near 5 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day? That sounds incredibly basic, but that's the basis of a strong diet. And once you've got that habit and routine, so you know they're eating 3 meals a day, that's really important. They're eating X amount of fruit and vegetables per day. Then you would start to look at, what does the composition of that meal look like? So if those 3 meals a day are just cereal in the morning, a sandwich at lunchtime, and whatever it might be in the evening, you might then, if you actually want to start taking individual performance to another level, then the composition of that meal would want to change, for example. So where are the carbohydrates coming from? What's the source of carbohydrate? Is there a shift from Cocoa Pops to something from more a whole grain option to an oats, for example? Are they then getting mature enough to add berries into that and nuts at the right time? Are we getting enough protein in the diet? That's one thing that may be overlooked at a young age. Is there a distribution of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Because if you can do all the training in the world, all the physical training you want, and lift as many weights as you want, but if the body hasn't got enough protein or carbohydrates in the right proportion, then you're not going to maximize that. So that's the point, you see, where it goes from generic to individual. But ultimately, is your foundation in place? Are you fueling at regular time points? Are you eating at the right snack points? And are you giving your body the best platform to start to look at it a little bit more deeply? And that's where I think that the individual work starts to become really important.
They say cricket is played mainly between the ears. Does better nutrition lead to greater concentration and then therefore performance?
Well, I think that's a logical assumption, isn't it? I mean, what you can quite frankly, if you've got a generally poor diet that's really high in refined sugar, that isn't not full of whole foods, that will impact, I guess, your concentration and your mood. I mean, what we did some work with some fast bowlers when I was with England cricket during the winter, and we actually looked at blood sugar, the impacts of blood sugar on different diets, and we put blood glucose monitors on these players, and we tracked them over a period of time, and we gave them different meals. So 1 week they would have a really high sugar meal, a high sugar diet, which was, fizzy drinks, Mars bars, Cocoa Pops. Brilliant. Players loved it. And the next week it would be a more balanced, mixed meal with a even distribution of carbohydrate, fats, proteins. And then we'd have a week where it was a really high protein diet and a low carbohydrate diet. We started to look at what the impact on blood sugar would actually be. And it did show, it was very individual, first and foremost. It wasn't the same for every single person. Each individual has a different tolerance to sensitivity to glucose. But you did start to see that some blood sugar would peak and trough at various times, but it would never drop or rise to outside of like a normal range, but it would have an impact on it. But the perception of the players was that they actually felt that when they were having the high sugar diet that week, that their mood was up and down. They were losing focus during these hard training sessions. And when they had the mixed diet, they felt that their performance and their mood was a lot more regular. So that was a really interesting a piece of work. So yeah, I do think that if you're being asked to focus and bat for X amount of hours in the Sri Lankan heat, it will only benefit you if you have the right nutrition before, during, and after to perform at your best. Because if you're talking about performance, it's about your best performance, whether you're an England cricketer or a club cricketer.
What are your views when it comes to caffeine in cricket players, men or women? You see on the sidelines before a player goes out to bat, they're necking an energy drink. What are your views on that?
I think the view on that comes down to first and foremost, what's the purpose for using caffeine? Caffeine's everywhere, isn't it? Particularly, the over if young people really shouldn't be touching. Young people look like teenagers or what have you. If they're looking at caffeine as a performance enhancing supplement, it's something we don't advise. That's not good practice. But the good evidence, great research out there for caffeine to improve performance. I mean, there's been good stuff done in endurance where caffeine can reduce the perception of fatigue, because it all kind of works with that central fatigue in the brain. And caffeine intake before performance, endurance performance, has been shown to reduce that perception of fatigue. But then again, this is where, again, you're working with the individual. You look at the dosage. Is the dosage right? Looking at 1 milligram per kilogram. Are they getting the right dosage before they perform? Have they got a tolerance to caffeine? If someone's a habitual caffeine drinker and they're taking caffeine before performance, are they going to get the benefit from that caffeine? Potentially not. So I think that caffeine, this has its place in performance. There's evidence to support that. Anything that we look at, is there a strong body of evidence to support a supplement? But ultimately, it has to come down to what is the goal of taking that caffeine. If it's a performance-specific outcome you're after, then you look at all the elements. And if caffeine is something that you feel can enhance your performance, then great. But then it's a social drinking of caffeine as well. If it's just a social drinking of caffeine, then that's a different conversation altogether. But if looking at it from performance, there is evidence out there, but it is highly individual, and you've got to get the dosage right based on body weight, so you're not taking too much caffeine.
And again, if we shift it back to a young player who really does want to take their nutrition and therefore performance to the next level, and say they're playing just one game a week, 100 overs on a Saturday. Leading up to that game, what tips would you give them in terms of basic tips, in terms of pre-game, in-game, and then post-game nutrition?
Yeah, so I guess if you're in the build up to that game, you're thinking start the day before. What you'd always promote is that the players were to have a good balanced diet in the build up in that kind of Monday to Friday period. And if they were playing on a Saturday, you'd want them to start thinking about putting good nutrition into their bodies the day before. Now, ultimately, if we're talking about cricket, it depends what your role is in the team is going to be the next day. If you know you're going to be fast bowling, you're going to be out in the field all day, then you're going to need a touch more carbohydrate to make sure that your body's full of glycogen, so you can keep bowling and repeat, recover, bowl your overs, and do it again. So you really want to be having a good diet the day before, where there's a good distribution of good quality carbohydrates, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So your classic porridge in the morning. It could be eggs with whole grain toast with some water, so you're hydrating. Snacking in between on fruit, apples, bananas, simple things, dried fruit, yogurt. Lunchtime, similar distribution of carbohydrate that you have at breakfast time, but trying to distribute it in a simple way. If you're even having like a nice roll sandwich with some nice lean chicken on there with some salad and tomato, you've got to ask yourself, am I getting some good carbohydrate, protein, and some antioxidants through fruits and vegetables in each meal? Same in the evening, having a good, nice, balanced meal like a spaghetti, like a lean spaghetti bolognese, for example. And then on the day of the game, what you don't want to really fall into the trap of is trying to overfuel. You want to make sure you fuel properly in that kind of match day -1, as we call it. And then on the day of the game, if you're going to be first balls at 11 in the morning, you want to be going into that comfortable, not overly full, but comfortable, and making sure that you're topping up your fuel reserves from an overnight fast. So when we sleep overnight, we're talking overnight fast. You top up your fuel, you have a good distribution of protein in that as well. So that might be again porridge with some yogurt or like a boiled egg. And then it's a case of going out and to perform and making sure your hydration is taken care of. Every time there's an opportunity to drink, take it. And then when it's tea, when it's break, it's eating what you feel comfortable with. I mean, we used to talk to our players around not over consuming calories during performance. It's the tea break, it's 30 minutes. Your body's only got so much time to digest that. So it's a huge meal, what you would want in that period of time. Maybe not. It's more eating little lighter meals that you can digest that keep you full. And then once the day's play is over, that's when you can start to recover and have a meal which is either a bit of a treat meal if you're not going to play the next day, or if you're going to go again, it's again getting the good nutrients back in to refuel and repair, because that period of sleep, that's when your body starts to repair to go again. So having again protein in your meal, your evening meal with carbohydrate and some element of vegetable, all those components together whilst you sleep will help your muscles repair and recover, so you can come back again fresh the following morning.
If you are advising an elite cricketer, is there any room for foods that are termed like junk food in the diet, or should they just eradicate it completely?
Well, the reality is yes, of course it is. During my time at England cricket, absolutely, players would eat indulgent food in any sport I've ever worked in. Well, that's the reality of life. There's a small percentage of athletes that are incredibly meticulous, and they're generally the ones that really rise to the top. But there's a time in every diet where nutrition which is low nutritional value is really important. The food is mood a lot of the time, isn't it? So where there's a period of downtime, or there's a period where performance isn't at the top of the agenda, I think that's a healthy thing to do, is to have some indulgence nutrition. So your desserts or your favorite food, whatever your restaurant might be. I think there's a social element to that as well. It's not all about being robotic with what you eat 9 to 5 every single day. There has to be that scope to release. A lot of the time, food can be that thing. And what is important though is that you get the balance right between when you are going to let your guard down and when you get back focused. I think if you get that balance right, then I think that's where you can have long-term success with your nutrition.
And cricket is a game played over many hours, how important is hydration? And if we were to give examples of your time working with the ECB, what kind of stuff were you talking to them about when it came to hydration? How much water intake were they having, overseas tours when it's X amount of degrees hot?
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head there. So your hydration strategy would be largely dependent on, well, the individual, but also on the climate. So if you're performing in cool conditions and your individual sweat rate isn't as high as it would be, then the amount of water or fluid you'd have to consume would be slightly different. So what we would look at, a lot of cricket was played in subcontinent, Sri Lanka, hot conditions, Australia. So India, for example. So before we went to India, one particular series with our Lions squad, we decided to do some heat tolerance testing on the players. And this was before a major tournament as well, where we wanted to kind of measure the players' tolerance to heat. So we worked with Loughborough University, and we put the players in like a heat chamber. We did an exercise protocol which would test their tolerance to heat to see how they would handle that. But we also would monitor their sweat rate during that time as well. So it would incredibly hot. So they would go into that kind of bout of exercise. We would get them doing performance, and they would wear the cricket whites, the pads, the helmet, the lot, trying to replicate how that would feel in that kind of hot climate. And we would put sweat patches on them. Through those sweat patches, that can kind of capture the electrolyte losses in sweat. We'd also monitor their body weight pre and post bout of exercise. And we'd also monitor their hydration status before and after that bout of exercise. And from all those components together, you can see, okay, how did their body handle the heat? How did their heart handle the heat? Did they start that exercise bout in a hydrated state or a dehydrated state? How much sweat did they lose? So what was their sweat rate versus how much fluid they consumed? And of the sweat that they lost, what was the composition of that? So how much sodium, for example, did they lose in that? And then from that, what you find was every player was incredibly different. So they're all performing in the same conditions, but how they handled that was different. So then from that, you're able to advise players on an individual fueling strategy. So you can say, right, some players started that exercise bout in a dehydrated state. So the first advice is you're going to drink X amount of fluid to start that day's performance hydrated. So we put a process in place for that. And then during performance, you put an individual hydration plan in place to make sure they stay hydrated. And also, if they're a salty sweater, then you would use various sports drinks with the sodium concentration that would help match their sweat rates. So it comes down to getting really good information about the individual and then putting in regular hydration strategies that help them. Not everyone at grassroots will have access to that level of sports science. So it's making sure you can do simple things like checking the colour of urine the day before, the morning of performance. That closely correlates to some of the what you call urine osmolality tests that we've done. So if the urine is quite dark and yellowy in colour, we know that you're slightly dehydrated, so they need to drink more fluid. So that's an easy marker. And then it's just simple hydration at regular intervals before, during, and after. What we did guard against, or we did advise against at my time at cricket, was if a player did present in a dehydrated state, they avoid the temptation to drink a huge volume of fluid, because not a lot of that fluid will get retained and some will be excreted out. So we through looking at science and evidence at the time, just going back some years now, we knew that if someone was dehydrated, it would only take 500 millilitres, so a bottle of water, to get them back into a hydrated state. So rather than the temptation of taking 1 or 2 litres straight away, you take a smaller amount over a period of time that will slowly bring you back to that hydrated state. So it's simple things like that. Check your urine hydration status, how you feel in your mind. You feel a bit grouchy, you might be a bit dehydrated, drink regular. And then the choice of drink then becomes slightly different. So if you're not expending much energy out in the field, or you're sat watching on the sides, then water would be adequate. However, if it's really, really hot and you're out bowling or out in the field and you are moving a lot, then a combination of water and a sports drink might be the option that you go for. But you've got to start understanding your performance needs before you select what fuel goes into your body.
Should certain foods be eaten in combination with each other to enhance the nutritional benefit to the body? And if so, can you give any examples?
Well, there's nothing specific because all food interacts with each other. There's various enzyme cofactors in every. If you break it down to the biochemistry of the food, the chemistry of the food, various nutrients all interact with each other. So that's why having a mixed diet is absolutely essential. If you want to get the most out of a particular nutrient, then it has to be eaten in combination with other foods. So a great example are kind of fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins. So fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, they need to be consumed with fat in the diet. So that's really important. Otherwise, they won't get consumed and you won't get the benefit from it. So vitamin D, for example, are really important and crucially important for many health functions, particularly bone health. We're looking at cricket. We looked a lot at vitamin D status of our players. Some players would need supplementation, some wouldn't. Some would need a maintenance dose. But every time a supplement would be taken, it would be advised to take with food. So the absorption would be maximized. So that's a great example. But I think that all food interacts with each other. And it's crucially important. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan who doesn't eat meat and you rely on your protein from plant-based sources. Now, nowadays, plant-based nutrition is a lot better than it was 10 years ago. So they'll have a better amino acid profile, for example, than they may have had. But you might need to combine different foods together to make sure you're getting those essential amino acids, which are really important for a young person's muscle growth and development.
Chris, it's been a fascinating chat. We can talk all day about it. Just to end on, what's your main takeaway that you'd like a young player who's perhaps watched this to take away from this from a nutritional perspective that they can take into their season?
The best way to answer this, if I was to, 39 now, I can put myself back in my shoes when I was a young athlete, whether it's cricket or football or not. When I was younger, I didn't appreciate the value of nutrition when I was in my teens, even early 20s, mid 20s. I didn't fully appreciate the impact it could have on me, my physical performance and physical development. If you're a young person now, whether you aspire to be a professional cricketer or not, I think ultimately, give your body the best chance to be healthy and to excel. When you're young, this is the best chance your young body has got because you are growing and recovering and developing at a rate that you're never going to get back. So you can only enhance that through putting good quality nutrition in your body. I think a time for indulgence food and junk food, absolutely, that's part of life. But more often than not, if you're more mindful, and what we always say, you eat with more intent. When you have a meal, look at it and think to yourself, is that good nutrition quality? Have I got some protein there? Is there some carbohydrate? Am I getting some vegetables or antioxidants? If you're doing that more often than not, you're giving your body the best chance to grow and develop, and then who knows where that might take you.
Chris, perfect. Thank you very much again for your time today. Really appreciate it, and all the best for the weeks ahead. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Neil.
So Neil Cagram, Cricket Love Stories, Chris Rosimus, thank you.